Awesome. I think we're started. Okay, cool. So, welcome everyone today. Today, we're going to be hosting our weekly Fireside session. We're going to be focusing on founder stories. So, we have a really cool guest joining us. His name's Adam. He's the co founder of Hijab2Go, a really successful hijab e commerce platform based out of Malaysia. He's also a serial entrepreneur and a really hardcore hustler. So, we have him today to share a bit more about his experience in entrepreneurship, setting up businesses based in Southeast Asia, and also running an e-commerce platform that focuses on hijab for women. So, welcome to the call today, Adam. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Good
Cool.
to be here.
So how it's going to work is I'll be. So you've sent through a couple of slides that we'll be walking through. It's focusing on your experience, your failures, your learnings that you've gone through building different type of startups.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to know a bit more about your background. So why don't you start by sharing a bit about your story? What are you working on?
Yeah, sure. And just real quick before we start, are we going to be able to get any questions from the people listening as well? Do we have like a live feed where they can ask?
Yeah. So what we'll be doing, we'll be getting questions coming through on Twitter as well as our chat. So
Okay,
when more
cool.
people join the call, we'll be able to get more questions coming through.
Awesome. Because I'm hoping to put them on the spot as well. Hope that's okay with everyone. So yeah, I'll start real quick, just tell a bit about myself. And like you mentioned, do want to spend, I think, most of today um, talking specifically about, some of the mistakes we've made and then the things that we've learned from that. Because obviously we could talk for hours about startups in general. So, I hope people will be able to take the most away from sort of seeing some of the places that we've messed up in. But the journey started for me in Montreal, Canada. I actually dropped out of university and my final year and started two startups while I was still studying, and just sort of fell in love with it right away. The first one was a math and science tutoring business, basically helping. I started tutoring myself, and it got to the point where I was doing 45 hours a week, and then started hiring math and science tutors and outsourcing the work to them. So, really small, simple business, but allowed me to teach myself some of the fundamentals of business. And then the second one was a nightlife and sort of entertainment membership card that students could use throughout the city. So in our first year, we had 30,000 members, and they could use that card to go to different clubs, restaurants, events, and get sort of discounts and vouchers and whatnot. That one, it was around the same time as the Groupon craze, so a few years ago, and we managed to get a small exit from it. So, again, small businesses, but a great way to build up the fundamentals. After that exit, I came out to Malaysia and joined Rocket Internet, the big German investment group, and started doing business development and e-commerce focused on Zalora, the regional fashion e-commerce giant. So that was sort of my introduction into this whole space. And then based off of Rocket Internet, managed to build up my network in the region. And we'll talk a lot about that later today. But, basically got involved with over a dozen startups throughout Southeast Asia. Some of them went well, some of them not so well, but a lot of learnings along the way.
So Hijab2Go is one of Malaysia's largest e-commerce players for hijab women. So tell me a bit more about how you got about starting that venture.
Yeah, so Hijab2Go was one of the first companies that we started. And, again, I don't want to go into too many details of all the different startups that we've been involved with because it would take a long time. But one of the big mistakes we made was that we just simply had way too many different projects going on. And when we started Hijab2Go, we weren't focusing on it as much as we really should have. The focus was distributed amongst a bunch of different projects. But the original concept was to take a lot of the learnings that we took from Zalora and bring that into a niche of Muslim fashion. Luckily, it's a niche market of 700 million women globally that wear the hijab. But yeah, that was basically the thought process behind it, taking this massive opportunity that's underserved. And if you look throughout the entire sort of global halal industry, it's not only Muslim fashion. There's Islamic tourism, Islamic finance, basically many different opportunities in these traditional businesses that haven't been innovated with that extra layer of technology. So we looked at Muslim fashion as a great starting point, and the long-term vision behind that business is eventually to bring the global halal industry online. So it's a big dream, but we're starting in one space, fashion.
That's really cool. So, what I'm interested to know about is, so for those who don't know what Rocket Internet is, they're essentially venture builders. They're a very successful, well, now a very successful business that replicates a lot of business models from Western markets and takes it to emerging markets across Southeast Asia. So, Adam, you were saying you worked at Zalora previously, which is an e-commerce giant here in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thought process behind, taking an existing business model and applying it to a niche, which is hijab women?
Right. Yeah. So a bit more about Rocket. I mean, everyone can Google their story. It's pretty well documented by now, but it's three brothers, German brothers. They started a couple companies in Europe. They got some early exits, really great exits. I think one of them was to Groupon. And then from there, they started looking at these proven business models, primarily in the United States, and then replicating it in emerging markets. So South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, these are the hot spots for them right now. Zalora is, like you say, fashion focused, although they're going in the direction where they want to build Amazon. So Rocket started with two companies in Southeast Asia. One was Zalora, fashion focused. One was Lazada, which was electronics focused. Both of these companies, although owned by the same group or started by the same group, Rocket, are essentially now cannibalizing each other because they both have the same long-term vision of building up Amazon. Yeah. So for us, it was looking at essentially the execution strategy that they use to build companies and getting inspired by that for Hijab2Go. A lot of people hate on Rocket Internet because what they do is so controversial, taking proven business models and then replicating it. The reality is 99.9% of businesses that we see these days are some sort of a combination of existing business models, right? So really what they're doing is taking businesses that work and developing them in markets that don't yet have that business, right? So it's easy to say, oh, they're just copying, but really they're bringing value to markets that don't yet have that business model. So I see some of the stuff they do not great, but really the core of what they do is adding value. So it's fantastic, and they do it in a way that's much more aggressive and much faster than anyone else would be able to do.
That's really cool. So I guess today's session will really be focused on, your success and failure cases, what the hard lessons that you learned in building your multiple ventures. For those who have joined the call, you're free to ask any questions. On your left-hand side, there's a Q&A tab. So I see that Eddie's asked a question on how to answer questions. So what you can do is list a question, towards the end of the call, we'll have about 15 minutes for Adam or myself to answer.
Yeah, sounds good. I can't see the questions, so I guess I'll leave it to you, Will, to pick and choose which ones and let me know. Cool.
No worries. So what I'll do is I'll open up the slides that you sent through, and then you can walk through that.
Yeah, so you guys, I've sent over some slides. I guess you'll be able to pick between looking at my beautiful face or the slides that Will has. The slides are pretty simple, so you can just glance at them briefly and then come back over. So
Can you see the slides on my side?
Yeah, right now I see the slides.
Okay, cool. So yeah. I'll let you just talk from there, and give me a shout when you.
I'll let you know when to pick over. Cool. So I'm going to focus most of the stuff today on, or sort of from the perspective of Hijab2Go. But again, we've been involved in many different projects, so I might give and take some lessons from all over, and obviously chime in at any time if there are any questions, and we'll pick them and stop me so I don't go on a long monologue. But yeah, so we've made a lot of mistakes. We haven't given up yet. We haven't. I think I think it's fair to say that we haven't failed, but we've definitely made a lot of mistakes. One place I want to start, I guess, is sort of talking about the mindset that's required to actually launch a startup. Yeah, so I'm going to go into a bit more detail of what it's like to build a startup, but let's start first with launching. So maybe Will, you can go to the second slide. I wanted to ask if anyone recognizes this, but that's going to be tough. This is a children's book, and there's probably a few of you that have seen it or read it as a kid, maybe even more recently, because the lessons are actually more valuable for an adult than for a child, because it's easier to understand. I'll just give you a brief synopsis of what this book is about. I think the book is famous because it's only about 20 words in the entire story. Basically, it's a kid who plants a carrot seed, and every day he goes back and he waters that seed. And his mom, his dad, his brother, they're all telling him, you're never going to grow, you're never actually going to get a carrot from it. Every day, the kid stubbornly goes back and waters it, goes back and waters it. Still nothing. Still people say it's crazy. Until one day, there's a carrot. And obviously, it's a kid's book, so the carrot, doesn't even fit in his wheelbarrow because it's so huge. The moral of the story is that, be stubborn, basically, follow your dreams, yeah? And the fearlessness and stubbornness that you see in this book is exactly what's required to launch a startup. Reid Hoffman of PayPal, he has this really good discussion. Maybe I'll share the links with Will and he can share it with everyone later. But he's got this cool discussion about the value comparison between having an MBA or going directly into the workforce. Yeah. So investors in the startup world typically put very little value on MBA. And I apologize to anyone that's listening that has an MBA, but there are some good things, like MBA students come with that knowledge base that young entrepreneurs lack. But anyways, looking at my story, and my partner as well, both of us sort of always had that JFDI / fake it till you make it type of mindset. We left university, immediately went into startups, and very stubbornly made all of our decisions based on intuition. So this is really good, but it can also be bad. But, really what I'm saying is that fearless and stubbornness is absolutely necessary to launch a startup and not to give up in a startup. But along the way, you need some real tools to be able to work with. It's tough to just freestyle the success of a startup. So let me go into the first one. Will, if you want to go to the first mistake. No money, pretty important mistake. And this happened because we were lacking a lot of those tools. We were just freestyling everything. So I think that this is from Paul Graham of Y Combinator. If you don't know Y Combinator, absolutely check it out. But he talks about why startups fail. Yeah. So if you look at that slide, if you go from right to left, founders quit because their startups run out of money. And then startups run out of money because they can't get revenue or investment. And they can't get investment because they don't have any revenue or growth, right? And they can't get revenue or growth because they're not making something that people actually want. So that's sort of the flow, and I like to share it. I also like to remind myself of it because it sort of demonstrates how incredibly easy it is to fail at a startup. In just a few steps, the company's completely broke. So we've gone through this flow, at least up to the point where we run out of money a few times. Luckily, we haven't given up, but we have gone through that flow. And for some of you, it's probably clear. The mistake here isn't that we run out of money, right? That's basically the result. The real mistake is that we're not listening to the customers, which is the first step, right? So let's talk about that. But Will, maybe do you want to probe and see if anyone's got any questions about having no money? Because that's a pretty big one. It's a pretty big concern. What's this? We can't see the slides.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Simba, hold on a second. Let me try presenting. Let me try switching that up. Just give me one moment.
Sure. Don't worry, guys. The slides are extremely basic, but we'll try and set it up here.
Simba, can you see the slides now?
Maybe at the bottom of their screen, they can click between either watching me or you. I'm not sure how it works.
So basically, yeah. So what you can do is click between the slides or your beautiful face.
Yeah.
So why don't we? So there's two. While we're trying to fix this up,
Yep.
there's one. A question that Simba's asked, and that's
Yep.
asking to cover what makes one online fashion company fail and the other one succeed. That's from Simba.
Okay. Specifically for online fashion. Um, I do have an answer, but it is tough to give a great answer for that because business is business is business is business, right? I mean, most of the reasons are going to be pretty general and applicable to almost every company, but specifically for at least e-commerce, and you can also say fashion e-commerce, would be operations as you scale. That's easily the number one challenge if you want to build a global business, right? So if you want to build a small local e-commerce site, a profitable business, that's relatively easy. I'm not going to say easy, but it's relatively easy. But if you want to build a massive global company within the e-commerce realm, scaling operations, so inventory management, order fulfillment, customer service, order returns, that's going to be the biggest nightmare by far. Marketing is relatively easy to scale, and you can base that in one country. Business development is relatively easy to scale as well. But operations, there's many costs and sort of complexities attached to that. So that would be the number one thing.
Can you share a bit more about the costs and complexities with trying to scale Hijab2Go?
Ooh, we're still figuring it out. Hijab2Go is going in the marketplace direction. So that's one of the solutions that we've picked to be able to scale effectively, right? So the difference between an e-commerce and a marketplace is relatively straightforward. In an e-commerce business, it's typically B2C. You take products from brands, you market those products, you sell them, and then you ship it out to customers. That's basically the flow. Whereas a marketplace, you rely a lot more on drop shipment. So let's say that I've got this brand in Indonesia and we sell a product, we're still marketing the product, we sell the product to a customer in Indonesia, then that brand will be doing the fulfillment directly. So in that case, we don't have to handle any of the inventory, and we can sort of chop off a lot of the complexities. The downside of that is that you lose control of basically quality management, right? So you have to make sure that you're picking brands that take the business seriously and are able to fulfill the orders. Otherwise, the customers are going to come back and basically hate you for it, right?
Really cool.
But marketplace is one solution.
So we have a question from Zach, and that's more towards investment side of things. So he's asking, how do you decide your company's value and therefore the share for an investor before your company gets any legs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fun question. Cool, and while I answer that, Will, maybe you can, for everyone listening, maybe you can write down just a couple points on what exactly you hope to take from this, because I meant to ask that at the beginning, but since I can't hear the people and the viewers, maybe you can just write it down, the top one or two things that you want to take away from this session. So I'll try and loop some of that in to my answers as well. But to answer the question, how do you value a company? It really, really depends on what industry you're in, what stage the company's at, and 8 million other variables. I'm going to assume that all of us in this session are looking at early stage companies. So either you just launched a product or you're developing a product, so super early stage. In that case, the value of your company is pretty fluffy. You're going to be giving away 15 to 30% of the company for a seed stage investment. And it doesn't matter how much revenue you have. It doesn't matter, how good the team is. If you're super early stage, you got to be looking in that range, 15 to 30%. And how much money do you raise? Well, it depends on what you need to achieve the next milestones to bring you to Series A. right? So, the simple answer is, if you have a company, your seed stage, figure out how much money you need to get to Series A, and that's how much you go and raise. What's your value? Well, you're going to be giving away, let's say, 20%. So use that to figure out the valuation.
I think another, so that's a really good question, Zach, but again, it really depends on the type of business that you're running.
Yeah.
And the type of investors that you're bringing on board. As an early stage investor, they're hedging against a high volatile business that it could fail any minute or go ballistic any minute. And so the type of investors that you should be looking for, from our personal experience, are those who not only share the vision of what you're trying to build, but also are directly invested in your team. Because ultimately, that's what matters for any early stage companies. They're not looking for the next Facebook in the concept, but they're looking for the people who are able to execute over and over again to take us to that level.
Yeah, they got to fall in love with your business, but far more importantly, they got to fall in love with you at an early stage. And similarly, you want to fall in love with them. An early stage investor, you want someone that's going to be helping the business grow actively and helping you get to Series A actively. So it's really, it's about the people, and that's why the numbers, 15 to 30% equity is always pretty standard.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide.
Do we have the slides working?
Yeah, so what I'll be doing, I think people can see the slides on my end. I'll go to the second slide, so the second mistake.
Yeah. So just, basically mistake one, the summary is running out of money isn't the mistake, that's a result. Not listening to customers is the real mistake. So let's talk about that. That's mistake number 2, breaking the loop.
I'll be sending through the slides after this. So for those who can't see it, we can distribute it after.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. So I wanted to ask here, who's heard of Lean Startup? I'm sure a lot of you have, if not all of you. I'm going to give like a real quick overview of what exactly the Lean Startup is, and then I'll explain why it's relevant for our second mistake. If you look at why startups exist, right, it's not just to make things or stuff, and it's not just to make money. They exist to learn how to build a sustainable business. Yeah. And so this learning can be validated by running experiments where you can test new ideas along every single stage of the business. In a lean startup, they've got something called the build, measure, learn loop. And that's basically the methodology behind a lean startup. So you build experiments, you measure the results, and then you learn from there. And with those learnings, you can make data-driven decisions on what to build next. And then the cycle continues over and over and over and over again. And so a startup that's really kicking ass is a startup that can go through that loop as quickly as possible, right? Because that means that they're learning faster than their competitors are. So back to us, we were really, really good at building, right? So any idea that came across our table, we were like, hell yeah, let's do this, let's build it. But we never actually measured it, and then the learnings that we got were all based on intuition. So we essentially wasted a huge amount of time and resources building things that customers didn't actually want, or weren't converting, or weren't bringing in high revenue or high margin revenue. Yeah, a really simple example. I mean, I've got many examples, but a simple one would be with our newsletters. Everyone's familiar with what a newsletter is. Yeah, so we would try text-based versus image-based, or we'd play around with different calls to action in the email header, or we'd have it addressed from a personal account instead of a company account, right? These are really basic experiments and really good experiments, but somehow we never actually measured the results, like doing the split testing to see which one's performing better. It seems incredibly obvious, and it is obvious, and I guess it just stemmed from us having way too many experiments running simultaneously. Yeah, so make sure that for those of you that are looking to jump into a startup, once you do, track your learnings, track everything religiously. Especially the early stage, keeping a strong grasp on that is incredibly important. If you break the loop anywhere, you're just going to be burning money and time. absolutely.
So what's a good starting point for those looking to firstly build their startup, but also the right tools to measure and test and learn?
Yeah, keep it simple would be the most important answer there. There's so many tools out there, and a lot of really good tools, but you're just going to get inundated with options if you try to pursue all of them. So let's say that you're doing e-commerce, and you're early stage. Start with running one experiment a week. That's it, only one. So maybe this week it's a different color buy button for all of your products. Instead of blue, it's now red. And strangely enough, experiments like that sometimes have, a 30% difference in conversion. So starting with one really good experiment and excuse me, every week trying a different experiment would be the best option. And as far as tracking that, you don't need crazy tools to be able to track one experiment at a time. You could even do it in an Excel sheet if you wanted to. So yeah, keep it simple, at least initially. And as the business grows, you'll get some kick-ass data analysts who can juggle 50 experiments at the same time. Then you've got a whole new suite of problems then. But initially, keep it simple.
Yeah, so for those interested in getting involved in startups or learning these strategies to test and iterate, we do have a lot of tools available on our platform. I'll share that with you after this call.
Sweet. Very good.
Cool. So let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, sure. Oh boy. Yeah. So mistake number 3, no focus. This is a huge one. And it kind of, obviously ties into what I was just talking about. We were building everything. We had a lot of stuff going on, but then we lost track of it and we couldn't measure or learn. It's a lot of fun to build, I guess, is how this problem came to exist in our startup. We had a lot of fun just pursuing any opportunity, but then obviously there's no focus. So this is probably a bit controversial to say, and even my own mom would probably slap me for saying it. A balanced life is a lie. Balanced life sucks. So we hear about balance so much, and it's always branded as a really good thing, but it's actually not, at least not in the world of startups. Being an entrepreneur is not an easy life. It's a very chaotic life full of roller coasters, emotional roller coasters and whatnot. If you want extraordinary results, then you require extreme focus, insane focus. So time on one thing, means time away from something else, and balance isn't going to help you focus. So a buddy of mine put it in a really interesting way. He sort of suggested that we only focus on what's really important. And again, that seems obvious, but sometimes what seems important isn't actually important. So focus on what's really important, and then everything else will either find a way to just get done. Sometimes it does happen, things just magically get done, or they'll end up not actually mattering in the grand scheme of things, right? So one huge win is far more valuable for an early stage startup than 100 small wins, right? The big picture is much more important. The big vision, that's what's going to get, draw in great team members. That's what's going to draw in great investors, great partners. Focus on the big picture, and that requires only having one or two key things that you're getting done. If you try and focus on all the small details, you're just going to get flooded. And a startup is always going to be messy. So if your thing, if you're a neat freak and you're trying to make every single detail perfect in a startup, it's simply never going to happen, and you're just going to be chasing your tail all day. Reid Hoffman from PayPal had a really good story. He said that the best thing he ever did as a manager of PayPal was making every single person in the company responsible for only one thing and one thing alone. So every employee had one thing that they were uniquely responsible for, and they knew that Reid would evaluate them based on that one thing alone. So it's a very interesting approach to managing not only yourself but the team as well. And I guess one other thing I'll say about this is that the concept of having one thing is applicable not only to yourself, but to the company as a whole as well, right? So the company and personally. There's this book, I'll also share the link to that, that's called The One Thing. And their recipe for results is purpose, priority, and productivity. So your big one thing is your purpose, right? And then the small one thing is your immediate priority. And that big thing shouldn't be changing on a day-to-day basis. The small thing will, right? So you get that one small priority done, you move on to the next. And the most productive people start with a really great one big thing. Same as the best companies start with a great one big thing. That's the vision and sort of the guiding compass for the entire team. If it's not on that critical path, if you come across a task or an opportunity and it's not on that critical path, you just have to ignore it. And I'm saying this from personal experience time and time again, especially in Southeast Asia. If you're thinking of doing business out here, the biggest problem that we had initially was that there were just way too many opportunities. It's a good problem to have, but it's a very real problem at the same time. And you need to be able to say no to it. So if it's not on your critical path, just say no. That's a long spiel. I hope it made sense.
I think what I'm really interested to hear about this whole, focus on one thing, focus on that one purpose. So a lot of our users are interested in, potentially starting their own business, maybe in e-commerce, maybe in the Southeast Asian markets. What would your advice be for those looking to find that one idea or that one, potential business opportunity? Where do you even get started? Because for them, they're seeing all these different options, all these different competitors, all these different players and industry segments. Where would you start to? Where would you advise to get started if one wanted to get into that space?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot that can be said about that, right? I mean, you joined JFDI, the Startup Accelerator. So did I. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what JFDI actually means here. People can Google it, I guess. But the acronym JFDI truly embodies the answer that Will just asked for. Just do it, right? For those that aren't getting it. I have a list on my Evernote that has over 300 different business ideas. And it's basically, every couple days for the past few years, I'll think of a new one. Most of them are beyond terrible, but eventually there's some sort of a combination. I'll refine this one, I'll pick that one, I'll start merging them together, and you get some really good ideas. So I would suggest for people to start writing down ideas. If you don't have them already, start getting, a list together. But at the same time, at a certain point, you'll find yourself thinking about building a company more than you're actually building a company, right? You can get lost in sort of that. It's very appealing. It's a lot of fun to work through a business in your head. Start thinking about the marketing plan and start thinking about the business model, the revenue model. Going through that as an exercise is good practice and it's fun. But at the end of the day, you have to get your hands dirty and actually start building a company and making the mistakes, right? Like what's good in theory is very rarely good in practice. So my number one advice would be to just start. And even if it's not the perfect idea, join something like QLC where you get the opportunity to go in and get your hands dirty a bit, and you'll know very quickly whether you love it or hate it, right? And if it is for you, then stop thinking about it, just dive in.
Yeah, I think a really good story that I always like to share. Only up until last year was when I really started diving into the startup space. So for those on the call, my background, I was previously a management consultant at Accenture. And, coming from a technology consulting company, you spend a lot of time dreaming and brainstorming about doing your own technology stuff. And I probably spent a good 6-7 months writing business plans, working on exciting logos over the weekend, only to realize that you end up scrapping and, losing focus and getting over it really quickly. So my segue into doing my first startup, which was a furniture platform, was sinking about $3,000 on freelancer.com to pay a team of Indian developers to build something. And that was, good in two main reasons. One is getting my skin in the game. And secondly, really trying to figure out and focus on one particular idea. 6 months later, we got accepted into Accelerator in Singapore, and we switched to the Kiosi idea. But that whole journey of getting your foot in the door, getting more contacts, building experience, and just building that courage to say, hey, let's do something different.
Yeah, once you've made that public commitment, it's things start moving along. If you want to start a company, tell everyone that you're going to do it, and eventually you'll feel so guilty that you haven't done it yet. You're just going to be forced to do it. Yeah, making that commitment's great.
So we have a few questions at the moment. So we'll start by the last one. So it's more focused on the operations and logistics. So considering operations and logistics, do e-commerce companies generally rely on Amazon services?
It's an interesting one. I don't know the exact numbers. We don't rely on it. We do everything ourselves right now. I'm guessing they're talking about the fulfillment services, not Amazon Web Services. But yeah, no, we handle everything ourselves. I'm not sure what other companies do, to be honest.
Yeah, I think
we like to keep control over as much as we can while still being scalable. Yeah. Not to say that Amazon's not great, because they're insanely great, but we are control freaks in that way. We love Zappos's story. I think it's Zappos of delivering happiness. And they basically just push customer service to the absolute extreme. And when you start outsourcing, really important stuff like order fulfillment, you lose a big chunk of control over that relationship with your customers.
Yeah, I think it's also using the lean methodologies sometimes. So taking a step back from the way that Zappos executed, I believe that when they first launched, they didn't even have products on their website. They just listed photos of shoes, and after customers actually paid for it, the founder would go and buy the shoes.
Yeah.
So the whole point of that process is to actually learn exactly what the customer wanted before investing the time, energy, and money into getting that delivered.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Simba. So he's asked, is it better to start before you have worked everything out, i.e. launch your site before you work out how to monetize it?
Yeah, I'm sure he already knows the answer to that question, and he knows what I'm going to answer. And I think Reid Hoffman actually, again, has a really famous quote about that. What was it? I could load it up. But basically, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you've launched too late, is what he says. So yeah, don't ever wait for your startup to be perfect, because it will never be perfect. Never. Even the best startups in the world have so many problems going on internally. And that's the excitement of building a startup. So yeah, definitely don't wait.
So a question from Arvin. So he's saying he wanted to ask about your source of ideas. What happens when you reach a drought?
Sorry, what happened? Hear about what? I didn't hear it.
So he wanted to ask about where do you find your source of ideas? What happens when you reach a drought?
What happens when I reach a drought? Honestly, I don't, because I'm not afraid to write down bad ideas. If you can't even think of bad ideas, then don't start a startup. Not being able to come up with a new great idea every day. Yeah, I get it. It's tough. There's there's a lot of businesses that are out there already. Competition is fierce. So finding, untapped opportunities isn't easy. But you should be able to at least think of bad ideas and just keep that habit going, right? Every day, make a commitment to write down at least one idea, even if it's crap. Tinder for dogs. There you go. They can, hang out and reproduce if they want. We've got some people laughing over here. Yeah. So, just whatever it is, make sure you write it down, make that commitment.
So there's actually quite a lot of websites out there that do list new ideas. So Product Hunt is a really good source of, crowdsourced cool ideas. But I mean, for me, when I do understand it is tricky to constantly get that flow of good ideas, especially if you're not in that space and you're not exposed to new technologies on a day-to-day basis. But my advice to that is just keep reading. There's a lot of technology startup websites out there. Focus on the smaller ones. So don't look at the tech crunches or the big publications. Focus on, for example, in Asia, there's techinasia.com. There's e27.com, and those are focusing on new upcoming ideas. In the US, there's betalist.com, there's Product Hunt. Again,
Springwise is another cool one as well. It's not as widely or not as popular as Product Hunt, but Springwise, they only focus on like really wacky business ideas. So if you want some weird ones, you can check that out.
Yeah.
I'd also say go to AngelList, because on AngelList you can see the startups that have been funded most recently, and then from there you can basically see what investors are excited about these days.
I think another insight that I've gained, the reason why entrepreneurs start getting a lot more ideas is because they're exposed to a lot more problems. And one of the core things that you're taught at an accelerator is, why are you the only person to be able to solve this issue? And when you're in a corporate job, or if you're working full time, most of the problems are already solved by administration, by HR. Most of your problems are first world lifestyle issues that you come up across. But when you're doing your own startup, or when you're working out how to build an e-commerce platform in a foreign country, for example, that's where you can start to break down, hey, I have issues with travel, I have issues with visa, I have issues with real estate, I have issues with logistics. And that's where you start snowballing with your ideas.
Yeah, one other quick thing I'll say on a related topic about coming up with ideas is that question that have, it's the age-old question: do I talk about my idea or do I keep it secret? If you're in that brainstorming phase, even if you're not, just always talk about it. Talk to anyone about it. No one's going to steal your idea, and there's 2,000 other people that are already doing it. Like, don't ever worry about that. So, but yeah, especially if you're brainstorming, just talk and talk and talk and talk, get people's feedback, get their input on it, and then you'll see these bad ideas start to evolve into actually potential businesses.
So we have another question on the forum right now, and it's talking about investment. So is it a bit tricky to raise money with investors if you are, or if you aren't, or can't work on it full time?
Yeah, like if you're not doing it full time, don't do it, would be my answer. And I disagree, honestly, because they would say, if you're in a great job, you're getting a salary, you can't take that leap, blah, 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 blah. I get it, but I'm not going to give an answer that I don't believe in. I don't see any legitimate investor giving someone money unless they are 2,000% full-time on that startup. But if your limitations, if there's certain restrictions in your life where you're absolutely forced to do it part-time, then do it. But I don't think you should go out and take someone's money while working on something part-time. Do it for yourself part-time until you've validated the idea, but don't take someone else's money on a part-time business. It just shows lack of respect for the money, I feel.
I think it's also big for Couchello. Our first start, we did raise money from an investor, and we were working on it part-time. And that investor invested in us for numerous of reasons, being, they like the co-founders, they like the product, they like the vision. But now that I'm doing it full time, it's a completely different spectrum, because when you're doing it full time, your mind shifts away from it being a side gig with a safety net in the background. And being an entrepreneur, I'm sure Adam, you can concur. Being an entrepreneur, it's all about how can you make this thing as big as possible? How can you drive this to be, as successful as possible with no, regards for failure?
Yeah. Yeah, no, investors want people that are just insanely ambitious. And, it was actually explained to me pretty recently. For an early stage investor, they should be pulling your heads out of the cloud. They should be bringing you back to reality, not the other way around, right? So you should be going in there saying you're going to take over the world, and they're going to be like, I love you for saying that, but let's be realistic. But they do want you to be crazy ambitious, and they also want you to respect their money. Absolutely.
So we have another question, which is probably up your alley because you're also running Mother Goose Ventures, which is a venture developer in Malaysia. This question is about what insight, can you provide some insight into what incubators look for when deciding what to invest in? So Is it traction? Is it revenue? Is it subscription? Is it fast growth?
Okay. That's a tougher question to answer than some people would think. It's okay. So the way I look at it, and again, a lot of people give different answers. To build any business, so it doesn't matter if the industry, it doesn't matter the type of business, you need three things: people, ideas, and money. Okay, and in ideas you can include the market opportunity and whatnot. So people, market opportunity, and then investment. For an incubator, they have money and they have access to money. So let's ignore that. For the market opportunity, that's pretty simple to validate, at least at a high level. You look at the market, you look at the size of it, you look at the competitors, sort of the segmented addressable market. You can break it down, either bottom up or top down. The last one, team, is by far the most difficult and the most important. So I can't speak for all incubators or accelerators or venture builders, but I would guess that most of them would say the team, the people in the business are the most important. And it's difficult to give that as an answer because it's not really tangible, right? How do you say that one person's better than the other to build that business? And it stems primarily from the story that you tell. Why are you passionate about this business? Why are you best positioned to build it? And do I believe that when you wake up one day and everything has gone to shit in your business, you're still going to be there fighting for the success, right? That's what you need to demonstrate to them. And then they'll believe in you and they'll invest in you.
That's actually a really good point, especially when for first-time entrepreneurs, how do they find that one idea or that one connection to an idea? For those looking to get involved in startups, apart from just doing it, what's the best way to figure out the right idea to start with? Is it the market opportunity? Is it is it being in a particular region? Is it the access to a particular idea or funding for those type of ideas?
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, so I think our case is probably a really extreme example of it. So for those that haven't checked out Hijab2Go, it's Muslim fashion e-commerce. I'm from Canada. I'm not Muslim. My partner's from Denmark. He's not Muslim, and we sell women's Muslim fashion, right? So how the hell are we passionate about that, right? It's not something that you'd connect 1 + 1 is 2 type of thing. So what gets us excited? What are we passionate about? We're extremely passionate about building a massive global internet company. When we came across the Muslim fashion opportunity, it was love at first sight, not because of the products, not because of any sort of religious connection we have with it, but just because it was an untapped opportunity that we knew we had the capabilities to fulfill. So it really depends on the person. What are they passionate about? For us, it was the opportunity.
So I don't think there's any more questions on the forum, but I guess I'd like to ask, and probably would be the last question, is where do you see yourself going, and where do you see Hijab2Go going over
Cool.
the next, 6 to 12 to 18 months?
Right. Yeah. Um, I'll give you that answer, and I'll give you the longer term answer as well. So right now we're, hopefully, knock on wood, closing our seed round. So within 12 months from now, we'll be physically in Malaysia and Indonesia, but with a global marketplace, so marketing globally. A cool, fun fact about our company is that although we're selling Muslim fashion, 50% of our orders right now come from non-Muslim countries. So the US, Canada, UK, Australia, that's where our market is. And, we knew it was a global opportunity, but again, it's very different in theory, and then actually seeing, real orders coming in from the Muslim woman in Texas who can't find, who can't go to a local hijab shop. So for us, that's the next big step, is break into Indonesia and then start, actively marketing globally. As far as long term, both my partner and I have this vision of, like I mentioned earlier, bringing the entire global halal industry online. And so that ranges across Muslim fashion to Islamic finance, tourism, halal food products, the whole gamut. And again, that's just, an insanely huge opportunity that a lot of people steer away from, right? You see a lot of the great tech startups coming out from the United States. I'm half American. I can say this. I think a lot of Americans are sort of turned off when they say, oh, it's, a Muslim business or it's an Islamic business. There's just no interest there. For us, we have absolutely no issue pursuing an opportunity like that. So yeah, that's what we're looking at long term.
That's really cool. Well, thanks so much for the talk today. Really do appreciate all of the
No
insights and
worries.
like the
Thank
the
you.
stories and stuff. Simba has a last message, which has come to Dubai, man.
Sounds good, bro. Send me your address. I'll be there.
So what we'll do is, so for everyone on the call, thanks for attending today. You can check out Hijab2Go by visiting hijab2go.com. If you have any questions, I'll be leaving, this broadcast will be available on our qlc.io feed. And if you have any other questions, you can post it up online and Adam should be able to get to you.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Thanks,
We'll be
guys.
closing the call, guys. Thanks.
Take care.
Cheers.